Hey, don't touch it. Why? What's going on? There's something wrong with the birds. Have you ever seen the film by Alfred Hitchcock, The Birds, or read the short story it was based on? Yes? Well, what's happening here is a very similar situation, except there's a reason for that. A reason that we're going to find out later. Right. This door's locked and our skeleton keys won't work on it. Maybe we should go round and find ourselves another way in. Chat, 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 chat. Which seems to be a thing in this era of Doctor Who. Lots of chatting, especially when it comes to exposition. I'll talk more about that later. Anyway, onwards. Come on! Okay, that works. On we go. Hello, ladies and gentlemen, Nick here, and welcome to my revisitation review of Doctor Who Series 12, Episode 6, Praxeus, which is the Doctor Who story of this series that does the environmentalist message right. Unlike Wolfen 55, where it came out very preachy and it kind of disrupted the story and it just came out as a left field twist, Praxeus does its environmentalist message very well done, in honesty. But what's the plot like? The plot of this episode sees a group of aliens trying to experiment on Earth's plastics and microplastics in order to find a cure for this disease called Praxeus, which affects plastics and microplastics. On Earth, they've tested some plastics in the oceans that birds accidentally eat, mistaking them to be food, as birds do. Due to human negligence, there's a lot of rubbish, a lot of plastics being left all over the place in the world. And due to the Praxis disease in the plastic, the birds are spreading across the world and attacking people and spreading the Praxis disease across the world before it kills the birds. And with the birds attacking people, it will claw people and get them infected with the Praxis disease. One such victim is a young girl called Jamila, who is one of the Two Girls Roaming blog series, along with a girl called Gabrielle, who tags along for the episode alongside some other supporting characters, including Jake, who is a police officer who's married to this astronaut called Adam, who goes missing in the Indian Ocean after a crash. After crashing into the Indian Ocean, and he goes missing, but he turns up to be in Hong Kong, being experimented on by the aliens to find a cure for the Praxis disease, which he's also infected with. And it's due to being the guinea pig for this experiment is how he's able to survive the longest of the people infected with Praxis, as we see Jamila and also a naval officer, American naval officer, being infected with Praxis, and they die after the disease takes over them and causes them to explode. We also get another character who's attacked by the birds, but we don't really see what happens to him. In all honesty, I don't really care about that character, but I do care about the fact that nobody acknowledged that he's gone missing, because this character was looking outside a scientific hut in Madagascar, and he was watching the birds, and then they attacked him, and then when everybody runs outside to avoid being attacked by the birds who are coming into the scientific centre, they don't acknowledge he's not even there, let alone what's happened to him. So I think that was a bit of a missed opportunity, or at the very least, I feel like they missed somebody, and they forgot to acknowledge it. At least with Kira Arlo in Pete Matteague's previous script, they were at least trying to rescue her, and they felt sad when she had died. It's just that they had other things on their mind to worry about, such as a lunatic attempting to blow up the building they were in. But this time around, they don't even acknowledge the guy was even there, let alone, oh, he's dead. Because of the birds, this virus is spreading across the world to Peru and Madagascar, and of course the Hong Kong base where the aliens are trying to find a cure for Adam. The Doctor and her companions, after the final scene of the last episode where the TARDIS was alerting them to what's going on, they split up and go across the world. And this is probably the episode that does the globe hopping element of Series 12 the best. It started in Resolution, but only for the pre-title scene. And then we got it in Spyfall, and we will get it again in Revolution of the Daleks, which in my opinion is the one that does it the weakest. It works pretty well in Spyfall Part 1 as well, and the time jumping thing also in Part 2. But Praxeus probably does the globe hopping bit the best in this series, as it actually works going to the different countries and seeing how things are being affected there, how birds from the Indian Ocean and Madagascar have made it all the way to Peru and started affecting people there, whilst Hong Kong is where the aliens have their base, with the trying to experiment on on Adam. And there's one other base in Madagascar where one of the aliens, Suki Cheng, who turns out to be a surprise villain, has their scientific base. I'm not sure if the guy I mentioned earlier, who doesn't get acknowledged when they die, was also an alien, or if he was a human who also thought Suki was a human. In all honesty, Suki is a pretty good character in terms of a regular supporting character, but once it's revealed she's a villain, she ends up being a bit of a disappointing villain. So the character kind of goes down a little bit once we get the twist, which is a shame because, like I said, she's a good supporting character prior to the twist, but after the twist there isn't a huge amount of focus or development on the character. And when the Doctor's even proposing that they try to help each other, Suki is then consumed by the Praxeus disease, which she's also been infected by, so there isn't any chance for her to redeem herself or even help sort the situation out once that happens. Well done, Suki. It's also pretty interesting that the climax of the story takes place on a alien-built, constructed under ocean area that Yaz mistakes for an alien colony, but it's actually an alien not settlement, but alien constructed place underneath the Indian Ocean, which is what the American submarine crashes into. And it interestingly ties in with the global plastic waste messaging of the plastics on top. This is one of the big areas of that being the case, which is probably why these aliens came to this spot to use, because it was one of the best places to come, although they did crash the ship clumsy. So there's a lot of good elements coming in here to work for the story, and it actually works pretty well with what's going on and connecting the international stuff. The aliens aren't the best villains in this story, but the way that the Praxeus got into the system across the plastics and the microplastics across the world is really interesting, and that works really well for the story. Also, just to let you know, this story was written and filmed and probably edited too before the COVID-19 pandemic started up, and it was broadcast just as the pandemic was in its early stages. Many of us fans are actually wondering if this episode would have been pulled had the series aired later in 2020, because the Praxeus pandemic has a lot of similarities to the COVID-19 pandemic, minus the quick and nasty death. Well, the deaths in the COVID-19 pandemic are also nasty, but the Praxeus disease is quick and pretty brutal, in honesty. While Suki Cheng is a mixed bag of a supporting character, great to start with, goes downhill once it's revealed she's a villain. And the other guy, who I mentioned earlier, Aramar, I think his name is, he's the guy who gets attacked by the birds in Madagascar. I don't really care for the character, so I didn't really care for him when he died, but I do feel like he should have been at least acknowledged. But besides them, we also got some pretty fun supporting characters. We got Jake Lang, played by the brilliant Warren Brown, who's most notable in the Doctor Who fan base for being in the Unit, the new series, Big Finish audio series. He's really great as Jake in this story. He's married to the astronaut Adam Lang, who's also a pretty good supporting character for the story and has some good messages about messages for Jake to not dodge life. We also have Gabrielle, who's also a pretty fun supporting character throughout the story. And the three actors do a pretty good job in their roles, especially Warren Brown, who is brilliant. We've also got Jamila, but she doesn't really have much screen time. She and the American naval guy are mostly there to die, though I do think Gabrielle should have had a bit more of a emotional reaction to seeing her friends die, as they have been friends for many years and have been doing this vlog series. So I feel like this should have affected her a bit more. As for our main characters, they're brilliant, especially Bradley Walsh and Amanda Gill as Graham and Yaz. They're really great together, and they also, when they're on their own, they're also really great. This is also one of Toz and Cole's better performances as Ryan, and he gets some pretty great stuff to do in this episode. The weakest link of the main three cast in this episode might be Jodie Whittaker as the Doctor, but she still does one of her better performances of her tenure in this episode, in spite of having so much exposition to talk about, especially in the Madagascar scenes. But I do think this is one of her better performances of her tenure, as I mentioned, and this is one of the better written stories for the 13th Doctor, without needing to have the character go into any dark or moping moments like we saw in the previous episode. Due to this episode being filmed in the same production block as Spyfall Part 1, we've got Jamie Magnus Stone, I believe. Yeah, Jamie Magnus Stone back to direct this episode. And it's also a pretty well visualized story with the visual effects really nicely done. Also, the aliens in this story, funnily enough, have this guns that, not the same type of guns as if we saw in the last story with the Time Lord guns, but it seems that between that story and this story, Series 12's favourite colour of guns is yellow. Yellow and white and clear. And overall, the episode looks pretty great as well. It does some pretty cool stuff. Although the Doctor's monologue at the start and at the end might not have been needed, we could have maybe cut those out, but they're not too bad. The story and the dialogue in the script could have had a little bit of polish with some dialogue like Gabrielle saying, "We're at the bottom of the ocean." After we basically established that. And also the 13th Doctor explained that he materialised the TARDIS around Jake when he's flying the spaceship into the air to distribute the cure for the Praxeus disease, but the ship's going to blow up, and then the Doctor rescues him in the TARDIS with it going around him, a la Parting of the Ways and other stories that do that. I'm wondering how much Adric feels about that. Also, Bella and Kane from Orphan 55, because the Doctor and company could easily have used the TARDIS to rescue them, but instead of that, the Doctor preached about global warming. But I feel like the Doctor saying that she can get the TARDIS around Jake could have been cut, and because we already know the Doctor and the TARDIS can do this. We've seen it a couple of times in the new series before. The Doctor doesn't really need to explain it, just do it. That seems to be a problem with the Chibnall era. It's telling more than showing with quite a lot of stuff, or we're just saying stuff that doesn't need to be said. And this refers back to, I think it was the Spyfall Revisitation review about the 13th Doctor getting so much exposition to say and not being able to carry it as much as some other Doctor actors like David Tennant or Peter Capaldi. And maybe some other characters, maybe having some exposition in there could help ease some of that, especially as it would help take the weight off Jodie Whittaker's shoulder due to being the main character, playing the main character in the series. It could help a bit, but again, this episode kind of gives her too much. And actually, on first viewing, I thought this might be the episode where she doesn't do that much exposition, and then it does. And then it's probably the one that has the most, or at least that's what it felt like on the first couple of viewings. On this viewing, maybe not so much, but lesson learned. When it comes to Jodie Whittaker era stories, don't expect there to be not so much exposition, and when there turns out to not be so much exposition, we can all cheer about it. But if there is a lot of exposition, well, at least you didn't get your hopes up about there not being that much exposition in this episode, only to be completely disappointed or proven wrong. Overall, Praxeus is a pretty fun and enjoyable episode from Series 12. There could have been a few polishes and ironing out of the kinks here and there, and some stuff could have been done a little bit differently, but it's a fun, enjoyable romp that just demonstrates the globe hopping across the world storyline really well, and it puts all of our characters, both main and most of the supporting, up to really good use. Also, I did think the actress playing Suki Chen did do a good job. It's just that the character kind of went a bit downhill when it was revealed she was the villain. So overall, I will be giving Praxeus an 8 out of 10. Score up from what it was last year in the initial ranking, and the reason is I just feel like it's a pretty fun story. It's quite an enjoyable one, and it's got some good stuff. Also, it does its environmental message right. mean, it's not entirely perfect, but it still does it a lot better than Orphan 55 did. It at least didn't stop the plot to preach about it. It still delivered its message whilst we went through the story, and it worked in a pretty good science fiction story way, as opposed to Orphan 55's, which backfired, so to speak. So, Praxeus, that was a pretty fun episode. It's also probably the most underrated episode of Series 12, objectively. I think because a lot of people probably aren't so keen on this one, or they might not even acknowledge its existence. Depending which fan you're talking to, they might even have forgotten about it. It's probably the most forgettable episode of the series, due to the other episodes being either infamous or well-liked. So Praxeus kind of gets swept under the rug, so to speak, along with quite a bit of Series 11 when acknowledging the Whittaker era as a whole. But Praxeus is still a pretty fun episode. Also, I would put this story above It Takes You Away if I was doing an overall 13th Doctor ranking, so that's a bit of the motivation behind the score as well. If you haven't watched this episode, I do recommend giving this one a go, and if you have seen it before, I would recommend giving it another watch, depending on what you thought of it on the previous time out, or first time out if you've only seen it once. That's it from me. Thank you for watching. I'll see you guys next time for my revisitation review of Can You Hear Me?, which is the second Doctor Who story to have a symbol at the end of its title, with a question mark this time round, with Kablam being the first with an exclamation mark. Oh yeah, side note, I do think Kablam is the better Pete Teague script, but then again, this story he did have some help from Chris Chibnall, so you can debate who was responsible for this episode not being as good as Kablam. Anyway, I'll see you guys next time for Can You Hear Me?, which is written by another new female writer, Charlene James. We've got 3 new female writers in this series, alongside Chibnall and returning writers Ed Hine, Pete Teague, and Vinay Patel. And Chibnall co-writes the next episode as well. And it makes a bit more sense for that one than it does for this one, in all honesty. But I'll get on to why in that review, or Revisitation review. So, I'll see you guys then. Goodbye. Don't forget to click below to subscribe to the Nicholas Payne YouTube channel.